where you're sharing that work. And if it is an external one, if there are advocacy opportunities like the World Health Assembly or PMNCH, for example, two advocacy moments that don't necessarily get a lot of wide media attention, it's a good opportunity to develop and to share your message with that key audience of advocacy targets. It's important to use every advocacy moment as an opportunity to share your narrative.
Okay, so you're saying here, taking advantage of opportunities as they arise, identifying targets. What do you mean by targets, and how do we identify those targets?
I think by studying them, and it's different for each market, actually. Some might be very obvious, like a politician you're trying to influence, as I said, and some might be influential leaders in a community. Some might be influential bloggers that you're trying to reach. There are a couple of members that have really done well in tapping into the sort of mommy blogger community and sharing their message through that. I know Save US does that very well, and they've actually gotten this group of bloggers to do one story a day until the end of the MDGs, and really continuing that narrative throughout instead of just waiting for a particular moment when you can discuss the campaign work.
Great. Now, when you're developing this plan, this communications plan, taking us back to that, who needs to be in the room? Is this just about our communications person sitting down and putting a plan together? How does that work?
Yeah, I think the way that it's worked in our team, I think you need more than just your comms colleagues in there. I mean, you need to know who you're trying to reach, and your advocacy colleagues will be able to tell you that. You need to know what sort of engagement is happening around a particular moment. Your campaign manager would know that. So for us, it'd be Serena who would be telling us the sort of action happening around a particular moment. And with that information, you then are able to develop a very clear communications plan. Because unless you know who your target is and what sort of activities are happening around it, it's very difficult to then develop products that will be effective.
All right, and can you give us some examples of what you would think are effective communications kind of tools, strategies that you've seen? What are some of the best ones out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think our colleagues at Save the Children India did this really well earlier this year when they had their elections. It was a moment happening in their country, and they tapped into what was a national conversation, and they turned that conversation around and created a whole campaign called #VoteForChildren and got everyone talking about children's rights, children's education, children's health issues. And they linked up with an influential blogging community called Youth ICAWAS. And they were able to do a blog a day with that blogger group, and some of it was picked up by their national papers. So while it's important to pay attention to what's happening around you and to use those opportunities to share your narrative.
So, I mean, that's a great example. You said it got headlines, so it went into the media. How do we balance kind of, we've had a separate session on media, and so tell us a little bit about where the media plans fit in.
You'll now be placed into conference. To mute your line,
in
press
this type
star
of work.
6.
Sorry, just something
To
starting
unmute,
via
press
the
hash 6.
teleconference.
Okay.
Carry on, Sofia. Great. So tell us that distinction between comms and media, or the relationship between them. If you can just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the current crisis with Ebola is a good example of that. I mean, there's obviously a media plan around that, and keeping people informed on a daily basis, tapping into the main media outlets to make sure that, information is being shared and accurate information is being shared, making sure that everyone is aware of Save the Children's response around something like Ebola. But there's also a very big comms element to it, because for us it's an opportunity to highlight around the campaign, for example, the weak health systems in some of these countries, which has led to, exacerbating this crisis even further. So what we've been doing on the comms side is highlighting some of the health stories around this crisis. And so I'd say, you know, we've been identifying workers that we profile and using that as an opportunity to show that there aren't enough health workers and calling on governments to, you know, increase the number of trained and skilled health workers in the area and increase their funding around their health systems. And so I think they're not, you know, mutually exclusive. You can work together. There's a media story happening, but there's also an opportunity to develop some really strong strategic communications products around this and use it in your advocacy and campaigning work. So these stories around the system feed into, you know, the work that your campaign manager would be doing. I mean, earlier you asked about who would need to be in the room. Well, for something like this, you know, the stories that you pull out of these countries would go into a position that your campaign manager is working on, or a lobby letter that your advocacy manager is working on.
Great, thanks, Sofia. That's really helpful. Sorry, just before we go any further, is there some banging happening in your background?
No.
Not. Okay, so everybody else, if you can just mute your lines while Sofia's speaking, otherwise we get some of your lovely background noise in the call. So listeners, I really want to just reach out to you if you've got any questions for Sofia. I've got a ton more, so I can just carry on going, but I really want to hear if you have any questions. Also, if you've got any good examples of what you thought was an effective communication strategy or some of the challenges that you faced with communications, again, feel free to unmute and just ask the question, or you can type it into the message section below. So, Sofia, communication strategies, a lot of these include media, but it also includes online engagement. You talked about bloggers. What are some of the social media elements that Save the Children has been utilizing in our communication strategies? And what are some of the best practices around the social media? Maybe even just take a step back. What do we mean by social media? I don't want to assume everybody knows this.
Okay. So what we're talking about with social media is mainly Twitter and Facebook. I mean, more and more now we're seeing Instagram being a popular platform for sharing quick videos and sort of grabbing the attention of people, and a good place for photos where, you know, Flickr is now fading away and Instagram is taking over. But really we're talking about Twitter and Facebook as the two most popular platforms on social media. And what we've been doing in the campaign communications group is just using those two platforms as a way to not only launch a big report around big global moments, but also carry the conversation throughout the year so that we're not having to continuously reintroduce the campaign to our audience. We keep the conversation going and we tap into ongoing conversations happening on social media. And I guess that's one of the big lessons to come out of this module is your communication strategy should look at the whole picture. So if you're looking at the whole year and you're identifying key moments in the year where you're going to make a big push, you should also be identifying the moments in between those big moments where you can carry on the conversation. And that's how you develop a more strategic comms plan.
So carrying on the conversation, you're keeping that drumbeat rolling. You're just keeping the issue in the attention. Is that what you mean by keeping the conversation going?
Absolutely. And I think Serena had a really good plan earlier this year when our focus for this year in the campaign, as you all know, was newborns. And so we had some very big moments throughout the year where we were making a big push around newborns. We had the report in February. We had the World Health Assembly where the Every Newborn Action Plan was adopted. And then we had some very big conferences. But we also kept the conversation going on social media by tapping into the popular sort of Throwback Thursday conversations and getting the staff to send in their, newborn photos of themselves as newborns or photos of their children as newborns, and getting them in country offices to engage their celebrities to do the same in order to get everyone to keep talking about the newborn issue. So it goes back to what I said earlier about paying attention to what's happening around you. If there's a conversation happening around Throwback Thursday, see how you can use that to push your message. We also did the same around International Day of Happiness, which is a very flaky day, International Day of Happiness, but we used it to talk about the successes that have happened around MDG4. So pay attention to what your social media audience is linking into and get them to talk about your issue. Use that to get them to talk about your issue.
Thanks, Sofia. Again, listeners, if you've got questions or examples, please let us know. We really want to hear from you. So you said flaky, Sofia. Now this is something that I've heard a lot, where people are saying, oh, it's too flaky, we can't do it. What do we see as a quality kind of intervention or quality type of tactic? And how do we know it's good quality? How do we know we're just spending a ton of time posting photos? How do we know if it's being effective or not?
Yeah. I mean, I think that goes to identifying what your key objectives are for the year, or around a moment. What does success look like in your particular market? And what do you need to do to get there? And if success means engaging your politician, then it might mean, focusing all of your efforts on placing an op-ed in the newspaper that your politician will read. If success means reaching a certain amount of people, then use the popular platforms that that audience will engage with. If it is something like International Day of Happiness that you think everyone on social media is using and is trending worldwide, then why not tap into that? And how it's been successful depends on what metrics you set at the beginning of your planning stage. And this is all about planning. You need to decide who your targets are, what your message is, what success looks like in your market, and how you're going to get there. And then you'll be able to see if it's successful or not.
So when you say those metrics, would we say something like success is 1,000 people retweeting a message that we've put up on Twitter? Is that a metric, or we're talking about something that's more?
It could be. I mean, it could be just a number metric. It could be, we want 1 million people to sign this petition. We want 1 million people to retweet this film. We want just one politician to retweet this film. We want to reach just one key person. It depends, again, on what success looks like in your particular market. And you need to identify that within your teams.
So I think that's a really great point in terms of sometimes it can be about the numbers, so 1 million people, but sometimes it's actually about who's doing it, so that politician who would retweet it. And that's good to keep in mind.
Sorry to talk over you, but not to forget that, sometimes big numbers do mean something. So if you remember a couple of years ago, there was an organization called 1 Billion Rising, which came out of that horrible attack in India of a young woman. And they wanted 1 billion people to engage over 2 days on social media, to use that to get the attention of the politicians they were hoping would change the laws around women's rights. And so sometimes the numbers do mean something, big numbers do mean something, if it can get the attention of a politician that you're trying to influence.
Ah, that's great. That was a great use of a title to articulate your metric as well as the impact you're looking for. Elizabeth Murray, who's the communications and advocacy manager in East Africa, has put down a really great example. And before I start reading it out, Elizabeth, do you have a microphone, or are you not able to use your microphone? Sometimes we have problems with...
I don't have a microphone. I hope
no, she's on the microphone. I hear her. Elizabeth, tell us the example you just shared with us.
Sofia has just mentioned about how do you...
Oh, you have to speak louder, Elizabeth. You've got a very soft voice.
Oh, okay. I hope you can hear me now, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Sophia's talked about how do you keep the story going on, not just when we're doing Dress for Survival or any other big events or big moments, but even after those moments. So I have an example today of what Kenya has done. Pitched the story to a journalist, and we're focusing on 4 women, and I really hope that you can read that story. I mean, this is a story from one of the toughest places for children to survive, a remote place in Turkana, as a story of 4 women coming from different backgrounds, of course as a result of whether they're married or not, and the necklace around their neck. But goes to say what Save the Children is doing there by impacting on these women. They have formed a mother's support group, and how this is influencing issues of planning, issues of family planning, and issues of antenatal, the clinics. And so keeping the story going on even after the event has been done, talking to the media, pitching them, getting their interest, getting their buy-in is really important. So that's one of those examples. Again, it will boil down to how we framing and tailoring our messages so that the media buys into the story that we want to sell to them, and so that is really critical as we look into the whole issue of developing, communicating our message.
Thanks, Elizabeth. This is a great example, and I hope everybody can see. I've cut and pasted onto the whiteboard so you can take a look at it and read it a little bit easier. We'll try to make sure that this is part of the recording of this video. I think that's a great example, and a good opportunity to bring those human interest stories, to keep the momentum going, to tell the story behind each of those. And definitely, from what Sofia is saying, this needs to be part of the plan. So Serena's asking something that kind of relates exactly to what Elizabeth's talking about. Why is it important to prioritize telling stories within campaign communication? Why? Sofia?
Yeah, because the stories, sure. I mean, the stories put the faces on the stats. It's very rare to inspire people purely on statistics, and so you have to pull out the stories from the report that you're trying to communicate. For example, and I think our humanitarian teams do this very well. With the Ebola crisis, and with the Syria crisis, and with the Gaza crisis, it's not just about X number of people have died, but they go in and they tell the stories of the children who are affected by these different events. And so I think storytelling is probably key to communications, particularly around the Ebola crisis. As I mentioned, we're trying to pull out the stories of the health workers who are at the front line of this, and using those stories to inspire change.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in many ways people look to Save the Children as the voice, as a voice piece on the ground who's seeing what's happening and can actually tell us the human stories instead of just kind of the top level numbers, which is, that's no easy task. Serena asks, how can we improve our campaign storytelling? And Serena's in the room with you, so I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you throw this question back to her. But Sofia, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on how we can improve our storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, I'd start off by saying I think Save the Children does it very well. I think through our videos, through our films, and through our photo essays, and through our, first-person accounts, I think we do this pretty well. I think how it can be improved is just honing in on who it's supposed to reach, and making sure that what you're creating will actually inspire that particular target audience. And also identifying new and different platforms to place these stories, I think, would improve our reach, and not just the usual sort of platforms. Go out and tap into the different social media platforms, for example. Tap into the BuzzFeeds, into the Upworthies, and get that audience engaged in your narrative as well, if that's the particular audience you're looking out for. So look outside of the box, is what I'm trying to say. Don't just look inside of our NGO structure, but go out and find out where people are having conversations and put your narrative there.
Great.
And Serena?
Yeah, I was just going to agree with everything. And also say that maybe it's about organisation. So I'm going to mute my line, maybe. Yeah. I think it's about organisation and prioritising storytelling in how you plan your strategy. And storytelling takes time to do well. It means going out searching for those stories, finding a creative way to tell them. So I think planning it and resourcing it, so making sure you've got the resources in place. We so often have our advocacy conversations for weeks, deciding our advocacy targets, and then that conversation about storytelling is left to the last minute when it should be sort of nearer the front end.
Great, thanks, Serena. And sorry, we've got a terrible echo there.
Yeah.
But Serena's saying basically make sure that the communication strategy is developed simultaneously with the advocacy strategy, so they complement and it's not an add-on, which I think is a really important point, and hopefully something that the module, going through the session on developing your communication plan will help you do. So, any other questions to people? Any other examples there?
I mean, I think I would just say also, I would say pay attention to which angles work best in your market. You know, so in some markets, a more hopeful angle to a communications narrative works best, and in some a darker one works best. So just pay attention to what your audience likes and tailor your message to them. So we tried this with the Be the Superhero film this year, sort of asking people to join in and, you know, take action and be a superhero, and the whole film was very uplifting and inspiring, and that seemed to be received very well on social media. So pay attention to the different trends out there of what audiences respond to best.
That's a really good point, and something I think we often struggle with as a global movement, where we sometimes have very different toned messaging around these issues, and keeping in mind that you need to be sensitive to that in your strategy. And also, I think it's a similar thing with what would resonate with the target you're trying to influence. In some cases, it's a shame and blame, but in other cases, it's about complimenting the efforts that they've made. So keeping that in mind, I think, is really helpful. All right, well, Sofia, we've come to the end of our interview. Thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
If anybody has any questions that you'd like to ask Sofia as a follow-on to this, you can email her at sofiadiarra@savethechildren.org, and I'll put that into the message box. Also, take a look at the OneNet page. Under the Everyone campaign, there is a lot of information on communications work, guidance, examples of videos, as well as other communication resources and tools. But also, share with us the tools and communications strategies that you've put together. We always like to really share what is already happening in countries amongst our other country officers and our other members. You know, that's one of the great advantages of being part of a global movement, is we have access to all of these examples from around the world. Also, feel free to use the blog function on the advocacy site in OneNet to put those examples up. We'd really like to get the conversation going there, as well as the challenges you face. It's not always the easiest thing to communicate on a very controversial issue or in a very kind of regulated market. So let us know how you've been able to, what those challenges are, and if you've been able to overcome them with any out-of-the-box thinking or use of other mediums of communication. I think that's always incredibly valuable to us. So any last thoughts, Sofia, on what you think people should keep on the tips of their fingers or in the top of their mind with developing communication plans?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add on to what you just said, to not just share the sort of success stories, but also feedback on what didn't work and why, and definitely feed that back to us at the center, or, you know, whoever's leading on a particular moment, because that's valuable feedback as well. And I would just, you know, go back to the top three things would be to know who your audience is, know what you want to say to them, know what platforms are best to reach them on, and keep it simple. Tell a simple story.
Yeah, great. Who, what, how, and keep it simple. All right. Well, thank you, Sofia, for your time, and thank you, listeners, for joining us on this webinar. It will be recorded. We'll edit it down a bit, and we'll have it posted up on the OneNet page where the training course is available. So if you found this useful, please feel free to recommend it to other staff members that you think would find it helpful. Again, the assumption is that you've already gone through the session, so if people are watching this video, please also direct them to the actual PDF session for them to look at. Thank you so much for your time, Sofia. Have a lovely afternoon in London, and I hope we'll be in touch soon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Charlie.
All right.